Warning, censorship. Warning, censorship. Warning, censorship. Warning.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Rebel News live stream on this, a Tuesday, December 7th, 2021. I'm David Menzies, and my co-host, well, let me tell you about my co-host. You know, folks, when news breaks, she tapes it back together. She is the she-devil with a sword. She is the Khaleesi of Northern Alberta. She is Sheila Gunn Reid. How you doing there, Sheila?
I'm great, David, but once again, I struggle with the lighting in my studio and the settings on my broadcast software. I look a little ashen and gray, like I don't eat enough protein, but that is mostly everything that I eat. Well, David, you're looking vibrant, though.
I think it's called high blood pressure, but I think you're glowing. I might keel over any second now, so if we have someone in the tech department to come in and co-host, that would be great. But two things we have to address, Sheila. First of all, this, of course, is the day of infamy. It is the 80th anniversary, if you can imagine. 80 years since the bombing of Pearl Harbor back on Sunday, December 7th, 1941. Really what brought the U.S. into the Second World War and prevented Nazi domination of Europe, you could argue. And, you know, you look back at that day of infamy, and what is still incredible to me, Sheila, is that as bad as the bombings were, as bad as the sinking of ships were, and the loss of life, of course, it remains a mystery somewhat that the Japanese didn't bomb the fuel storage tanks, which would have set the American war effort, at least in the Pacific, back by years, losing all that fuel. So that was, I mean, I guess there's a silver lining in anything, but the fact that they didn't take out that incredible target was so fortunate. What are your thoughts looking back, Sheila, after 80 years of the bombing of Pearl Harbor?
I look back as this is the day that Japan bit off more than they could chew. Yeah. And when I look at the outcome of World War II, especially with Japan, we have to look at a lot of parallels between what Japan did then and what some of the more radical warlords around the world today do. Yeah. So, for example, Japan engaged in mass beheadings, sex slaves with the comfort women from China, torture, burning people alive, suicide attacks. They were the ISIS of their time. And there is something to be said for overwhelming brute force to precipitate a cultural sea change. Now, you would look at Japan right now and you would say, they're definitely Japanese. They're not American. They didn't adopt American culture or anything like that. Fighting, I think, prompted a bit of a cultural. I'm back. I think.
Oh, Sheila, I think we're having some difficulties with. It looks like
terrible parts of their. I'm gone.
Hey, Sheila, can the kids get off Netflix?
They're at school. This is just that I have worse internet here than some parts of the third world, and I know we can't even say the third world anymore.
There goes your job at CBC.
Yeah, darn it.
But you know, Sheila, I can't. If you bring up Pearl Harbor and the U.S. involvement in the Second World War, I don't think you can overlook the fact that ultimately what ended the Second World War in the Pacific was, of course, the nuclear bombs dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And revisionist history is just unbelievable about the condemnation of America doing that, the civilian deaths, which agreeably was tragic. But my point of view is, Sheila, that had the U.S. not done that, the war might have gone on in the Pacific theater for another decade. Japan showed no willing to surrender. In fact, the reason why the Americans dropped a second bomb on Nagasaki was the fact that Imperial Japan was saying, oh, what happened in Hiroshima? It was a fluke. There were climatic conditions, they were selling it that this was a one-off. And the Americans reluctantly had to drop another to say, look, we've done it 2 times, we can do it 22 times. We have the technology, we have the bombs. And like I said, Sheila, had they not done that, the death toll, I think, and many historians think, would have been much greater with another decade of wars going on in the Pacific theater. What are your thoughts? Because I think this armchair quarterbacking we have today condemning America for dropping those bombs is completely unfair.
I know AD wants us to jump into the show, and I will just in a second. Again, with the parallels between what happens today frequently and what happened then, the Japanese use their own people as human shields. Yeah. I learned this from Glenn Beck, actually. The Americans dropped leaflets that looked like Japanese money so that people would pick them up. And they said, move inland. We're going to bomb coastal cities. And Japanese propagandists came on TV and said, stay where you're at. They thought they could use their population as a human shield to prevent the Americans from doing what they needed to do to end the war. And again, we see this all the time. These days, there's nothing new under the sun. I'm just saying that fighting a war to finish it can trigger a cultural sea change for the better sometimes.
100%. Well, Sheila, we have to mention what the ostensible policy reason is of the live stream chat. So that is your bailiwick, my friend.
It is. And then we'll get into the successful Democracy Fund event that took place last night. And then we will, you have a very special guest lined up and some very breaking news. So we want everybody to stick around for that. So let's get all the nuts and bolts out of the way, and then we'll move quickly into that. So this is the Rebel News daily live stream. Used to just be hosted on Friday, just hosted by Ezra Levant, and just on YouTube. But the news is changing so fast, and there's so much news every single day. Some of the best ways to talk to you and each other about it is this way. It's not often best in a fully produced video. It's more timely, quite frequently, this way. And I think a lot of you come to us for our reactions and opinions, and you're going to get them here. But we used to just host on YouTube, but YouTube, when Biden got elected, they went full censorship mode. They didn't have to pretend anymore. So the soft censorship of demonetizing us and making us not ad friendly, they just completely cut out our super chats altogether. And then they gave us an extensive list that seems to be growing every single day of things that we cannot talk about on YouTube. And some of those include questioning the advice of local public health authorities, which, I mean, I guess they are infallible. They're like the Pope, I guess, according to the Church of YouTube. Anyway, so there will come a time where we have to say goodbye to YouTube, but not our YouTube viewers. We will encourage you to join us on the other platforms upon which we are simulcasting right now. And those platforms are Rumble, Super U, and Odyssey. And all of those 3 platforms allow you to do something YouTube doesn't, and that is support the work that we do completely willingly through Super U Shouts, Odyssey Hyper Chats, and Rumble Rants. You can tip us as a creator, and if you leave us a comment attached to your tip or donation, we will do our best to address it on air. And that is that. I think that's all the nuts and bolts.
And of course, we have to talk about last night, Sheila. The Democracy Fund put on another barn burner of a show, sold right out. It was the 4th show TDF has put on at Canada Christian College, which is an absolutely gorgeous venue. I got to tip my hat to Dr. Charles McVitie, the audiovisual extravaganza that's put. It's like going to a WWE wrestling event. It is that high tech, probably the most beautiful facility I've seen in terms of a small, relatively small. I'm talking not an arena or a stadium, but an other venue. And I'll tell you, Sheila, you were absolutely fantastic last night. In fact, it was incredible. I was ringside, and the screen, I don't know how big the screen is. And I'm like this
big.
little
I'm 42,
tiny...
David. I'm 42. A woman of my vintage should not have her head that big in front of that many people. It was like 40 feet of my head. Yeah.
Oh, and there's Artur Pawlowski speaking from Calgary. Oh, but no, Sheila, it was, I felt like, there's a DC comic supervillain, Gigantica. She's like a 50-foot tall woman, right? And for the life of me, I don't know why they draw Gigantica wearing a skirt if you're a 50-foot tall woman. Anyway, I won't get into that. But the fact is, you look like this incredible giant, but looks are one thing. It was the content that I think blew everyone away. You were so fantastic in setting up the. There's the stage, folks, and as you can see, that looked like a sort of a Mount Rushmore of freedom fighters. Pastor Pawlowski, Pastor Hildebrandt, Dr. Julie Ponesse, of course. What was your takeaway, Sheila, of that event last night?
I think the fact that it sold out and that we had so many people tuned in online, it shows how disconnected. Yeah, there's me, really big.
Gigantica.
Really, really big. It shows how disconnected the mainstream media are, the politicians are, the public health authorities are with the normal people's sentiment about the crackdown on the churches, using COVID as an excuse. I think it's, for me, persecution is just something that happens to Christians, and it will happen for any number of reasons. This time it was COVID. And so it really showed that the normal people of Canada care about this issue, and they don't think that what the politicians and the public health officers are doing is a normal reaction that any normal person would take. And it was funny because I did have a point at which we did go long, but I rounded up this thing that I have. It's always on my desk because I always want to read from it. It's called The Politics of Conscience. And it was written in 2014. It's a speech, and it's very compelling. And it was written, I'll just read you one thing really quick, and I know I'm springing this on AD. It reads, "A state cannot endure in all peaceable freedom and tranquility if it does not recognize the due limits of its power. We have seen repeatedly in our own time that states that claim unlimited power over all spheres of common life, by that very fact, limit, sometimes in brutal ways, the liberty, prosperity, and peace enjoyed by their citizens." You know who wrote that? Take a wild guess. Jason Kenney.
No.
Jason Kenney, this is his speech on the politics of conscience. It was remarks to the Thomas More Lawyers Guild of Toronto in October 2014. And he goes into depth here about St. Thomas More, who was ultimately beheaded by Henry VIII because the state, the crown, claimed authority over the church by which it was not entitled. And this was written by a man who, 7 years later, locked up 3 pastors in Alberta. How quickly people change.
Sheila, could you do me a profound favor, and I'll even pay for the postage? Can you mail that to Premier Kenney, and please, and with a note saying, please read as soon as possible? That is incredible. How would you respond, though, Sheila, to the contrarian approach to what Premier Kenney has been doing in terms of jailing pastors and locking down churches, which is, well, yeah, Sheila, he did say that once upon a time, but that was when there was no such thing as a COVID pandemic. That was when there was no such thing as emergency orders being put in place. How would you respond to that contrarian question?
You don't need protection of your civil liberties in normal times. The times when you need protection of your civil liberties, and actually I don't even need the government to protect my civil liberties. I need the government to leave my civil liberties alone. But the time in which they are most valuable is in a time of crisis, when the impulse of the government is to reach into your civil liberties and stomp on them. That's when the test of a man is made. And Jason Kenney failed that test by even his own measure.
Unbelievable. And we should also note at the event, Sheila, we had a couple of special guests, Sergeant David Haynes of the Toronto Police Service and his wife, Krista Ford Haynes, yes, the daughter of Premier Ford. These are people very active, well, Krista certainly, on social media. If the premier is over here in terms of COVID regulations. His daughter, Krista, is over there. She is not vaxxed, neither is her husband, which is why this 20-year veteran of the Toronto Police Service is suspended without pay. And Krista has been, oh my God, folks, I'll tell you, the amount of abuse and insults and vulgar comments she has endured in mainstream media, in social media. As for mainstream media, it's kind of funny, Sheila, how basically the mainstream media approach to Krista exercising her freedom of expression and speech is know your role and shut your mouth, as The Rock used to say on wrestling. Yeah, kind of like how we treated women in the Victorian era. And this is coming out of the mouths of modern day feminists, if you can believe it, folks. It's the bittersweet sadness of last night, Sheila, is that I had arranged an interview with Krista Ford for after the event. She was, mobbed with well-wishers after the event, so we waited maybe 40 minutes or so. 2 cameramen shoot, Lincoln and Maurizio. We were going into the room to do, the interview in private, and her husband, Sergeant Haynes, came up to me and said, "We're going to have to reschedule the interview. Chris is not feeling that well." And I asked him to give me his word of honor that he is going to reschedule, because I've gone through this before. This is my first rodeo with rescheduling an interview. And I told Sergeant Haynes too, Sheila, we aren't the mainstream media. We're going to be fair. We are not going to vilify someone for having a differing opinion when it comes to COVID-19 and masks and the vaccine passport. So, folks, be patient. I'm hoping to reschedule that interview. I've got Sergeant Haynes' word of honor that Krista will be interviewed by us, and we'll just see what happens in the days and weeks ahead. Do you think the promise will be fulfilled, Sheila?
You know what, David? You know me. I'm an eternal optimist, but I do think it is interesting to see all the feminists in the mainstream media and the feminist COVID Karens out there just absolutely shocked that this grown woman who's married has a different opinion than her father.
Yeah.
Why is that so shocking to anybody? David, are you getting messages? Is your special guest coming along?
Well, it's very hard to find the Rebel News headquarters unless you've been here before.
It is true.
So even when I give specific directions, But I listened to, it was a roundtable on CFRB, and none other than Deb Hutton, who is the wife of Tim Hudak, who twice ran for Premier of Ontario. She was basically saying, listen, when you're in politics and you're a member of the family, you have to toe the party line. You have to keep your lips zipped for the greater good. And I'm thinking, what?
Tell that to the Conway family.
Sorry, what was that, Sheila?
Tell it to the Conway family. Kellyanne Conway, her husband is a crazy Lincoln Project. Her kid is even wilder. I mean, people are grown-ups, and even when they're not grown-ups, like the little Conway kid, people have opinions. It's okay to disagree with your family. That's the point. Your family is not some homogenous block. People are different.
And here's another thing, Sheila. It's complete speculation on my part, but it's a hypothesis. Say Premier Ford was more like, Governor DeSantis, and he was about freedom and not putting in these oppressive mask mandates and vaccine passports and all the rest. If Krista Ford was the full-on vaccine passport person and going on social media begging her father to see the light and to lock down the economy and force masking and force vaccinations, these same people like Deb Hutton would be saying, Premier Ford, listen to your daughter. She's the voice of reason. They are such hypocrites.
Yeah, it's true. We should bop along to the story from PEI, by the way. In PEI, a trans woman is to speak at the Montreal Massacre Memorial Service. December 6th marks 32 years since the École Polytechnique massacre. That's the massacre that spawned the gun registry for some reason, because a man who hated women wanted to do violence against women. All of a sudden, it was the problem of all Canadian gun owners, including me. A transgender woman in Prince Edward Island has been invited to speak at a Montreal Massacre memorial service being held today by the PEI Advisory Council on the Status of Women. I was deeply touched, said Anastasia Preston. It's a huge honor for myself, and it's a huge honor as a trans woman to be included in an event like this. For decades, trans women have been kept out of the conversation around gender-based violence. Okay. I have a real problem. First of all, this was violence against women by a misogynist man. And yet it has been for years and years used as an excuse to punish women like me who were 30 or so minutes away from a police station when things go sideways. These are the same advocates who, I mean, it's one thing to remember the Montreal Massacre. Definitely do that. But it is so often standing on the graves of women to sort of push this idea of collective guilt across the entire gun-owning parts of Canada. But then we have someone who was born a man, yep, co-opting a place that belongs to a woman. The violence was committed against women because they were women. Yep. And now a woman, a biological woman, is denied a place to speak.
Sheila, here's the thing. I don't know what the rules are. And I ask you this because...
I don't know either. I'm a woman. I don't know.
I remember I went to, it was October 2019. It was a little public library in Toronto that was swarmed by the radical trans element and their allies, namely Antifa and wannabe Antifa. And it was the feminist Megan Murphy was there, who they call a TERF. And there was a huge protest and full of intimidation, trying to prevent people from going into this library. If there wasn't a police presence, I could tell you, I would have been swarmed and beaten without a doubt. These were very vile, odious types. But one of the people there was Sherry DeNovo, who used to be a member of the provincial parliament here in Ontario. And I think she's now a woman of the cloth. I'm pretty sure it's the United Church. And guaranteed. I went over.
You're guaranteed. Yeah. It's a self-help group with a cross behind them.
And I went over to her because she was there in solidarity of the thugs trying to shut this library event down. And I brought up the issue of trans women in sports, how there's an inherent disadvantage to naturally born women when they go up against trans women, men that have become women because of muscle mass, respiratory capability, et cetera, et cetera. And I said, what about that? And all she would say, Sheila, like a robot, she chanted it 3 or 4 times, was, trans women are real women. Trans women are real women. So it was like having a debate with a Coke machine, okay? That, you put your loonie in and you don't get your soda. And so according to the left, I'm thinking they have no problem with her being there. And, the question arises, I wonder where Justin Trudeau was on this file. Do you remember in 2015, I think it was, remember the women's only meeting with the future Prime Minister?
Ladies' night.
Pardon me?
The ladies' night. What's your favorite virtue?
Yeah, where he made that infamous comment about the respect he has for China, for the basic dictatorship in terms of getting things done. So I question, would Justin Trudeau allow trans women in too? So what I'm saying is, I don't know what the rules are anymore, because if you ask Sherry DeNovo, who is as left as you could possibly get, if that's a guy throwing a wig on and saying, you know what, I'm not David anymore, I'm Davida, that's good enough for me. Trans women are real women. There you go, Sheila.
I think for me, a lot of these things are a non-issue with why I have a problem with this. So again, I say this every time. Live your life. I don't care. Don't use the government to make me care. That's all I ask. And don't make our churches care. Just leave the churches alone. Leave everybody alone. Live your best life. But for me, what really bothers me here is that someone like me, born a woman, married, 3 kids, but also a staunch advocate for gun rights, pretty adept in firearms myself, hunter, gatherer, farmer, conservative. I would never get it, and, kind of good at my job, kind of accomplished sometimes, depending on who you ask. A woman like me would never get invited to speak at these things, even though I've also been a victim of violence. I've been a victim of political violence simply because I was a woman who happened to be conservative. But I would never get invited to speak at one of these things. Why? Because according to these people, I'm the wrong kind of woman. But this is the right kind of woman. That's the problem I have here. Because it is not about trans women or biological women. It's about politics. This person has the right kind of politics. And so despite the fact that I'm a biological woman, I would never, ever be included in this conversation because I'm a gun rights advocate. I think gun rights are the way you level the playing field against violent male feminists sometimes. So someone like me, I'm not a real woman to these people. That's my problem.
You're 100% right, Sheila, and it is because of your politics. And I remember this was about 10 years ago. I heard this story on the radio. I almost went off the road. I was laughing so hard. There was this pamphlet by some organization in the UK to go into schools. And basically the title was Great or Influential Women in British Political History. And it was a whole listing of all these women. And there was one notable omission. Margaret Thatcher. How can you not? Because even though this woman winning supermajorities in the British Parliament is indeed someone that deserves as much historical reference as possible, the fact of the matter is she's on the wrong side of the political agenda, and therefore this pamphlet going into UK schools is omitting any mention of this great British Prime Minister. Whether Margaret Thatcher was male or female, she was great. It just matches your story. You're on the wrong side politically, and therefore you can even use violence as that little worm Dion Buse or whatever alias he's going by these days did to you at a women's rally in Edmonton, of all places.
Yeah, where the women secreted him away so that he didn't get arrested at the moment. AD, before we go into the next story, because I don't want to get cut off too soon, I think we should go to the store, if you don't mind. Okay, perfect. And I just want to point out to everybody that I dug in the back of my drawer today, in my t-shirt drawer, and found my Don't Talk to Strangers shirt.
I love that shirt.
With an alien on it, because that's not really an alien. Those are 3 at the bottom, 3 little unvaccinated children. And this is a do-gooder coming to take your children and give them the jab. So don't talk to strangers. That's the moral of the story. Let's go to the store, though, because I had a meeting with the team that runs the store this morning, and I have very important things to inform you of. If you want anything from the store in time for Christmas, you must, if you're in Canada, order it before the 14th of December to make sure it's at your door by Christmas time, and don't cut it that close. Please don't do it. But we've got some great things in the store. You can use the coupon code Sheila10 if you haven't already. You can only use it once, though, so make sure you make it count to get some Rebel merch for your favorite uncle, the liberal auntie that you don't like so much. Get her something for spite, too. And if you've already used the Sheila 10 coupon code, you can use Menzies 10. And again, make it count. Pile the things into your cart because you can only use that once.
And Sheila, another reason, and this isn't hype, to order as early as you can, because unlike other Christmases, there's a whole bunch of postal workers right now suspended without pay. And I'm sorry, Canada Post doesn't enlist Santa's elves and Santa's workshop to pick up the slack. And you know, and leave it to Canada Post to do this. I'm talking the corporation, Sheila, to put in this mandate at the busiest time of the year, Christmas time, when there's all these parcels out there. Are they trying to put themselves out of business? Are they trying to surrender the delivery business to UPS and FedEx and the rest? Just unbelievable, the mismanagement, and also the ethical and moral degradation of firing or suspending without pay employees for not getting this jab. You know, unbelievable.
David, you have a hard time believing that the government would do something stupid that would inconvenience the entire country? Are you really? Did you fall off your bike or something? We should get into the next story before your very special newsmaker joins us. She's on her way. This is an exclusive. It's a story that you won't find anywhere else. It just happened, and she's on her way to the studio, and so you'll get it right from the horse's mouth. I'm going to hear it with everybody else because I just heard it in a quick phone call with David.
And you're not going to believe this story.
Oh, I think people will believe it, actually. I think they will. Look at this next story from Switzerland. The convenience of offing yourself here. Suicide machine that can be controlled by blinking faces no legal issues in Switzerland. Apparently this thing is 3D printed. They're suicide pods. They resemble the thing they launched Spock out of when he died. They jettisoned him off the Enterprise onto planet Genesis. Am I right?
Yes, but Sheila,
I shouldn't know that much about that movie, but I do.
But the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few.
Look at this. A 3D printed capsule is set to revolutionize assisted suicide. I'm reading a different article. It may be legally operated in Switzerland. According to an expert opinion obtained by Exit International, is that what they're calling a pro-suicide organization? Exit International? The organization that developed a Sarco machine and was first reported by Swiss Info. In 2020, around 1,300 people died in Switzerland through euthanasia. I'd like to see that number compared to COVID deaths, by the way, just out of curiosity. They were cared for. That's an interesting way of putting that. They were cared for by the two largest euthanasia organizations in the country, Exit. Oh my goodness. No connection to Exit International and Dignitas. The Orwellian names for these things. The current common method is the ingestion of liquid sodium pentobarbital. After taking the drug, the person falls asleep within 2 to 5 minutes before slipping into a deep coma and dying soon after. The capsule called Sarco offers a different approach to a peaceful death. That looks terribly claustrophobic to me, without the need for prescription substances. It can be activated by the person who wants to die. By blinking, I'm pretty sure you just blink. Like, what if you change your mind, but you've blinked? This seems like it's rife with problems. The machine can be taken any place to die, like an idyllic outdoor setting or rooms in the euthanasia organization. The capsule is mounted on a device that floods the interior with nitrogen and very quickly reduces the oxygen content to 21 to 1%. The person feels a little disoriented and may feel slightly euphoric before losing consciousness. The whole thing takes about 30 seconds. This is awful. This is just, I don't know. This is just terrible. We're all going to end up in one of these things one day if we're not careful.
That last clip, with that beautiful countryside in the background and the pot, look at that. Do you know what that reminds me of? If anyone's seen the film, I think it's from 1972, Soylent Green, where the world, it's a science fiction film where the world is grotesquely overpopulated. And there's all kinds of incentives in that world to end your life. And one is to come into, it's basically a theater, and you get a jab or a tonic, I can't remember, but you lie back and they show a film. It's like on a theater screen size viewing vantage point. And it's clips of the Earth as it used to be when there were species alive that are now extinct, and they play beautiful classical music. It's like this gorgeous music video as you drift into death. That's your gift for deciding to opt out early. That's what this reminds me of. Got to ask you this question, Sheila. Do you think this pod is powered by Microsoft? Because, you know, Bill Gates, he's been banging the drums for years about how overpopulated the world is. And I wonder if he's got any side hustle here, much like he's buying shares in CN Rail. I think he's the largest single shareholder right now of CN Rail. And he's the biggest owner of farmland in the U.S. It's very funny how these guys who are all about, you know, future gadgets and gizmos and software, Bill Gates is buying like real infrastructure stuff, like, you know, the real you know, bricks and mortar things like farmland to grow actual food and rail lines to transport that food. I wonder what is going on in that man's mind.
I will start taking these overpopulation people seriously when they're the ones in the suicide pod, but it's not meant for them. It's meant for us. Yes. It's like I'll start taking environmentalists seriously about rising oceans when they quit buying oceanfront property for their mansions, but they never do. It's just that they want to use the threat of all of this to control how you live. One last thing in this article that was on Disclose. I read this and I'm like, why even bother? You just made suicide look pretty and beneficial. Last line, if you or someone you know is struggling with depression or has had thoughts of harming themselves or taking their own life, get help. The National Suicide Prevention Lifeline, and then they give the number. But you just spent an entire article telling me that suicide is fine, it's painless, it might even be euphoric according to these people, and it's the right thing to do in certain circumstances. So why bother with the rest of this stuff here? Why bother? Who are we to judge, we should say, right?
Or Sheila, do you think maybe there's something nefarious and sinister going on, that when you phone that hotline, despite what's being advertised, maybe the counselor on the other end is saying, you know what? Maybe suicide is a good option for you. You know, think of how you're helping the planet. I'm not saying they're saying that, but you're right. That is baffling. They put that message at the end of that story.
Yeah, I just, the good thing is, I get to be ideologically consistent when I say I'm a conception to natural death kind of girl. This is all gross to me. I don't have to do the mental gymnastics of figuring out when suicide is okay and when it's not.
Indeed. Oh, I see through our window. Our very special guest is here. Someone who caused some breaking news less than an hour ago, folks. It doesn't get fresher than that. So, okay, Sheila, you're going to read some comments, and we're going to bring in our special guest and get her mic'd up. And keep tuned, folks. As Billy Red Lions used to say on Maple Leaf Wrestling, don't you dare miss it.
Oh, sorry, I froze up there for a second with the most sinister look on my face. We've got a chat from Georgie gives us $1, says Bill O'Reilly writes in his book that if there was an invasion of Japan, many people would have been killed and he wouldn't have been born, according to him. Yeah, there would have been millions of more deaths. Absolutely. And it's not as though it was something the Americans wanted to do. It was something the Americans' hands were pushed into doing. Kane Enmark gives us $2 and says, Sheila, I will see you on the show. You are here on Blaze TV to tell the Americans what is going on in Canada. Shout out to AD. You know, Ezra sometimes does Glenn Beck's show once in a while to give a bit of a state of the Confederation here in Canada about how terrible it is. I know he was on there a couple of times to talk about the persecution of the pastors here. Fraser McBurney says, all I want for Christmas is to end this nightmare and get back to normal. And he found his cap lock again. Mick3CA gives us $1. Fight for freedom now. Do your shopping, dine in, and use the gym maskless without showing medical papers. If we do nothing, then we may be thrown in creepy decorated hotel units at any time. Joyful from the Heart gives us $1. Sheila, you looked great last night. Thanks for sharing how Christians in the Nineveh plain know their faith can lead them to their death, but worry about being able to persevere in the end. Amazing. That was my big takeaway, was when I went to Iraq. And when I came home, I thought, are we willing to do what they are willing to do there in the face of certain death, in face of ISIS, hostile Shabi? And I got my answer pretty quick, because 4 months later, churches were locking themselves down when the government told them to. Okay. I don't know if you want me to finish this up, AD? Do you want me to finish this up real fast or no? Okay. I'll sign off, or I'll just step back, and our special guest is in studio.
And welcome back to me, folks. And look who my special guest is. It is none other than Belinda Karahalios, the co-founder of the New Blue Party.